right. I'm going to introduce myself. My name's Sandy Peterson. I am the transition coordinator. That means the 16 and older kiddos. The transition coordinator for PTI Nebraska. PTI is the state's Parent Training and Information Center. We provide support to families of children with disabilities and special health care needs. It's a statewide organization. There are 9 of us in the shop. And so when I tell you that we're driving all over the state, I'm telling the truth. It's a job that I gave up and retired from other things to be able to be a part of PTI, because it really has taken me full circle from when I was an in-home instructor for Region 5 mental retardation services before the law was developed, which would give you some idea of how old I am. My career has been, I want to explain a little bit just so that you have some idea of who you're listening to. I'm the parent of 2, grandparent of 5. One of my grandkids has a disability. Everybody that works at PTI Nebraska has a child with a disability except me. I'm the grandparent of, but kind of same kind of thing. My career was in education, the whole 40 plus years of. And my final position that I retired from was as the director of special ed at ESU 3 in Omaha. I was the assistant director and director there for 16 years. And then a year later, a school district south of Omaha asked if I'd come down for a year and just make sure that things were working the way they were supposed to. It was supposed to be a year's worth of employment, wound up being 6, not because they were bad, but because we started some new things with response to intervention and those kinds of things at that point in time. And then they wanted to make that position full-time, and I, at that time, was working part-time PTI, part-time there in the school district, and I didn't want to leave PTI. So I walked away from that, second retirement, and now work part-time at PTI. So we have a group of folks at PTI that are extremely committed, and I'm very fortunate to have some peers that are amazing people. And we'll talk about some of that down the road here as we talk about some of these materials. I know that the 3 of you got yours, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started. What would be really nice is if you would consider just filling out the top of this one. It has all the names of different kinds of disabilities and things on the front and on the back. But if you fill out the top, because as we talk, there may be things that you would like me to send to you. And if we have your information, then if I have your information, then I can go ahead and do that. If you don't want anything from me at the end of today, then I don't need that piece of paper. Really up to you. So, but it is the opportunity, I think, for us to share. We have so much information back at the office and to make available to folks, and I just want to be sure that we're able to give that to you if you want or need it. For example, have you folks seen the Along the Way documents? This was developed by Developmental Disabilities. They put a group of folks together and said, let's put some books together about a variety of topics. The top one is a guide to parents of infants, toddlers, and children with disabilities. So this is the little bitty guys. That's not my end of things, but the other 3 documents are, one is a guide for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, a guide for adolescents and young adults with intellectual developmental disabilities, and a directory of resources. And it is amazing. The documents are wonderful. I can either send to you hard copies, if you'd like, or I could email you copies and get those to you too. So if you want the Along the Way documents, if you want all 4, great. If you just want the ones for the older kiddos, that's great too. Whatever, just let me know on that sheet, and I'll be happy to, when I get back to the office, I'll be happy to send those to you.
If you want to email them to us, you can also post them on our website.
Sure, I can do that. That'd be great. All right, so Along the Way has been kind of the new, I think they've been out for about almost a year, and kind of the new kid on the block, but really most of the families that I work with have really found those to be extremely valuable. So wanted to make sure that I offered those up to you tonight. I brought kind of 2 ways of talking tonight, and I wasn't really sure which way you'd want to go. So we can, with 3 people, we should probably be able to figure that out. One would be the PowerPoint document that you have. That PowerPoint talks about the value of the transition plan, and it also then gives you some idea of what the goals should look like and also what they shouldn't look like. So there's an example and a non-example, as well as how that all kind of fits together. So that would be the PowerPoint. Also, the last frame of the PowerPoint is Nina Baker. Nina is at our office, just started to go part-time now. She has been full-time her whole career, but in the last month has gone to part-time. And Nina is our person who supports families to complete the applications for DSSI. She can talk guardianship through with you to help you just kind of think things through if you want that support. She knows a ton about Medicaid. She's just very bright, and it's been her thing for as long as she's been at PTI. So I would say to you, that would be somebody, and like I said, the last frame on the PowerPoint document, and the PowerPoint just says the first slide is transition. So the last slide on the back side is Nina's information if you ever need to talk to her or want to talk to her, and then mine is the slide just above. So just sharing with you that Nina is, she's phenomenal. I was just saying that I don't know that she's ever worked with families that had the kiddos denied for any reason, no matter what the disability. So she's been fun to be around to be able to learn things from. But when I took over this position, she'd already been doing those things, and it was kind of like, why would I want to learn all of that when she's already the best of the best? It didn't make any sense. So we decided to kind of split things up. I do the education part of things as far as like the transition plan and so forth, and then Nina does the agency kinds of things. And then we have another person at our office. Her name's Holly Schweitz, and I did not put Holly's name on here because the work that she does is like 4 times or 5 times a year. But she runs our newest grant, which is FEAT, F-E-A-T. It's Family Employment Awareness Training, F-E-A-T, Family Employment Awareness Training. And it's a 2-day event. They're not 2 days back to back. It's on a Friday and then the following week on a Saturday, or vice versa, whatever. But it's 2 different times so that families have time to kind of consume the information from day one and then be prepared to learn more and listen more on the day 2. It is all about employment and all about the how-tos for kids, everything from carved employment to entrepreneurship. You name it, it's there. And then there's a full day that just talks about agencies and the kinds of agencies that are out there to support, what those agencies can do for you, and then those agencies come in the afternoon and do a whole afternoon of just allowing you to come get a face with a name, that kind of thing. And it's all done for your location. So if Clearwater, Nebraska wanted us to come and do a FEAT training, we would find their agency folks to bring on board. We don't bring people from Omaha along with us to somewhere. It's really about the families, about those places, about the supports that they can get. So the FEAT training's new. We've done 2 trainings in the Omaha area, 1 in Kearney. The next one is in Columbus. That's next month. I think it's January or February. Could be February. And then there'll be 1 in Lincoln coming up. So we'll be able to get that information out to you folks via DSAF or whatever. But we'll make sure that you know. Again, when that grant possibility came up, I was at a national conference, and the National Technical Assistance for Transition Conference, and found out about it. It's been happening in Kansas for about 7 years. And they explained what they do, and it was like, Nebraska needs that so bad. That is exactly what we need. So I immediately went to the State Department, the VR folks, and said, whoa, I know how you can spend that 15% that you're looking to spend for those pre-ETS kids, those kids that are still in school. That would be this grant. So they did give us the grant, and I'm excited for what it's open. The doors that are open for families have just been amazing. So just going to put that out there to you, and please don't hesitate to come if you get a chance, because it's well worth time spent. All right, the rest of the documents that I brought along would be the other way that we could work through tonight. So one would be the PowerPoint, and the other would be just the other documents, and to talk through those documents as far as they relate to the transition plan and how that plan is supposed to work. What we have found is that families are very adjusted to the IEP. They've been doing IEP since their kiddo was 5 years old, so we got it down, and we know who's going to be there. We know, we've got it. We understand what's supposed to happen. And then when the student is going to be turning 16, all of a sudden it is, whoa, we've got this new thing, and nobody's trained us. And typically that has been the case. I have had teachers who have said to me, it's not my job to train parents. Well, if it's not yours, then whose would it be? But it is a giant switch, and oftentimes what will happen is that families will go through that grief cycle one more time, because it is a new thing, and it is scary because it's about our kids leaving home. It's about that venture out at some point, and so whatever they're capable of doing and wanting to do could be a big step. And so that whole transition plan is kind of one of those kind of kick in the gut things for just a little bit until people kind of get the hang of it and understand how it's supposed to work. So any thoughts by the three of you as to if we were going to go one direction or the other? Would we do the PowerPoint tonight, or do you want to work on these other documents and kind of learn what they are and what they can do, and then go through the PowerPoint on your own and look at it? Like I said, the PowerPoint has the information that shows what a goal is supposed to look like, what a goal isn't supposed to look like, and then how those all fit together. Because in the transition plan, it is about post-secondary, so it's about after school. Those goals are about after school. So that kind of planning is already, we're already starting to talk about at 16, which your son just became. We're already talking about, what kinds of dreams does he have? What kinds of preferences and interests are there? What kinds of things do we want to do, down the road? And we start making plans that way, but we have to write, according to the law, we have to write post-secondary goals in 3 different areas: education and training, employment, and this is all in the PowerPoint, just so you know, education, training, employment, and then, if appropriate, independent living. And so the goals we have to have goals in those areas. And that means that one of the things that the law requires is that the school, for one, and then state VR, Nebraska VR, if they're involved, and others, take a look at what kinds of assessments could we use to be able to determine what your kiddo really does have for preference and interests. What kinds of strengths are there when it comes to employment, those kinds of things. There are lots of assessments out there. The state department has given money to educational service units in the state. So like I think 7 or 8 educational service units, and there's 18 of them or 19, have now money to be able to purchase more assessments and to be able to get a little more on the ball with that. Although this has been in the law since 2004, we're still on the uptake. We're still working our way to figuring out how it works best, how it fits best, what we're supposed to do by law. And so I spend a lot of time when I go to IEP meetings or when I sit down with families, I spend a lot of time just talking through what is it that you need to know to be able to be a viable partner, what kinds of things, because you're probably, with the knowledge base that you'll have after tonight, be more of a leader in your meetings than you are a follower. Kind of depending on the school district, of course, but it's because there's a lot that schools are still trying to figure out. So what do you think? Should we talk through the additional kinds of materials and then want to do that? We've got to vote yes. Okay, you all right with that? And we'll talk definitely about goals and things. Well, I'm just going to grab these papers then, and we'll work our way through them so that you know what you have in your hands, because I want to make sure that that they're usable for you and that they make sense. The one document that we'll just spend a very short period of time on, but want to make sure that you know that you have, is the timeline. That's everything from, and we had VR, DD, we've had lots of people take a look at this document and give us feedback and more information. So this is a document that is good for all of the above, and we even give you a back page that's blank so that you can write notes and keep track of things for yourselves. But want to make sure that you have this. This has become probably the most popular document that we put out from our place. We have parents ask for it on a daily basis.
Sandy, do they have anything like this for younger students?
Connie has some things. Yep. All right. So the other 4 documents that we're going to talk about then is the one that's kind of multicolored, black, red, and blue. We'll put that one on top. And then we're going to, no, we'll move that second. Then the other one says Intact on it. It's the one that's landscape. We're going to make that the top one, and then we'll put that multicolored one behind it. Then the Nebraska Department of Education document, and then topic brief. And I set my clock so that about 7:40, we're going to cut it off, and then we'll see what kinds of questions you might have. And if you don't have any questions, fine. But you'll have my name and number in case you have more that you'd like to spend some time or whatever. We could certainly do that. The first document is from Untac, and if Untac has a wonderful website for teachers in particular, but also has a parent section. And so you could just go online and just put in Untac, and it'll come up for you. And the parent site has everything that I think anybody moving into transition would want to know. But they also have even like information on assessment, and as far as if a teacher would like to figure out what assessment to use, and then maybe what kinds of activities they want to put with that. They've even got, activity development in there. I mean, it's amazing what they offer. So I would just say that Untac is a site that I typically recommend to teachers as well as families. I serve on several boards and workshops in the Omaha metropolitan area in particular, but one of those is the State Transition Coalition, and so I'm a part of making decisions about the state conference. For example, state conference is in February. It'll be in Kearney, and for the first time ever, yay, we're going to have a parent strand at the conference. It is 15 years have been just for teachers, just for professionals, just for those folks, and we had a nice conversation, and PTI is taking on the responsibility of developing the parent strand for this year. So we will have a parent strand in February at the state conference. Those are the kinds of things that I try to stick around when I'm having the opportunity to be a part of those kinds of activities, just so I can get the parent word in here and there when I get a chance. So I'm very excited about that. I think that'll be a new thing and very needing. I also am the chair of the State Rehabilitation Council, so the advisory group for Nebraska VR is what that agency is, and I was just named president like 3 months ago. So just another way for me to kind of keep families in the forefront and be able to ask questions and get answers, in particular when things aren't working the way they need to be working. So if you have questions about VR and you want to know more, or things aren't working the way you thought they might, or you have questions about how it should be working, please don't hesitate to contact me, because I'm more than happy to get you to the right people or to try to talk it through with you myself. So the Untac document is really, we're going to go through, and it is what is mandated by law. So school districts would use this document to be able to look at a file. They'd pull out your child's file that has a transition plan in it, because the student is over 16, and they would use this document to go through and actually see if they've got the right things in there the way it's supposed to be done. So we'll start with the statute is, I think, fairly clear. It's the first IEP to be in effect when the child turns 16. So if your child turns 16 in, let's say that the IEP is in September and your child turns 16 in January, that September IEP should have had a transition plan in it. So it should be in place when the child turns 16. That's law. Or younger if the team decides that that's something that they'd like to do. Now, there are some school districts in the state who will start all kids on a transition plan at 7th grade. It's just something they do. There are some school districts that will start children running their own IEP meetings as of 3rd graders. That's just, everybody just does it. We have gotten some really great educators in Nebraska who have done some really cool things about self-determination and self-advocacy, and the kids are running their own transition plan meetings, and it is amazing just to watch and just listen to the magnitude of thought that comes into what they're thinking about, what they'd like to do with their lives. So in AA, it talks about appropriate and measurable post-secondary goals. And again, when we're talking post-secondary goals, we're talking about the goals for after high school. So we'll talk about the way that's supposed to be written in a little bit, but I'm chomping at the bit because it isn't ever done right, or it's rarely done right. But it's based on age-appropriate assessment, and we've talked about the fact that that's supposed to be done by your school district. The law says more than one, so minimum of 2 assessments every year need to be completed, and that's about your child's interests, preferences, and strengths. So that's what the assessment is supposed to give us. That's the information we're supposed to get. That information has to be, or should be, on the IEP document somewhere. Our state does not demand where those things are put. It's really up to the school districts. Our state really believes in local control, and so wherever that happens to be, most of the school districts in the state use the state's SRS system, student record system. The larger school districts in the state all don't because they want to develop their own, I guess. But anyway, it is about having it somewhere. So sometimes it's in the present levels of performance section where they put all the rest of the evaluation information in present levels. Sometimes it is actually in the transition plan part of the IEP. It really kind of depends on the school district and where they've determined that it needs to fit. Some school districts don't have it anywhere, and that's against the law, so just saying to you, it needs to be somewhere. So the information about those 2 assessments need to be somewhere. I've recommended to school districts that they consider another page that they could pull up in the IEP, a notes page, where they could actually start listing from day 1 what assessments are used, what the outcome of those assessments were, and as time would go along, you'd certainly be able to see over a period of time the changes in your kiddo as well as the things that maintain the same. So you'd have some idea of, yeah, that preference has been there for 3 years, wow, and be able to move forward with that kind of information. So we've talked about that. We've talked about a variety of ways to try to keep that information. So just so you know, it's supposed to be there. Again, it says under AA that it is supposed to be related to training, education, and employment, and where appropriate, independent living. And again, that's because those are the goals that you write. Under BB, it talks about transition services, and part of that is the course of study. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding in the state about course of study. Course of study is supposed to list all of the courses of study for the entire time that the student is 16 and older. So it would list sophomore-ish, as well as, or unless they start earlier, it would list that all the way through to age 21, if that's what is determined to be appropriate. And the reason that's the way it is because we have a tendency to think about kiddos and only think about academics. A lot of schools will only put academic information under course of study, and in all honesty, a lot of our kids, the academics isn't nearly as important as the functional and behavioral kinds of things. So if my son was interested in construction and we were kind of getting the hints after, a period of time that, yeah, that's the direction that he'd really like to head, then we'd be putting, those kinds of courses, whatever the school could offer me, we'd be adding those to the course of study. That does not happen a lot in this state, as much as it should. So just would say to you, that's something they want to keep in mind. The course of study is supposed to be every year, and that can always change. The course of study can always change. Every year it could be different, but it needs to be listed so that you have some idea of what's coming and some idea of when those things that are functional kinds of things will be a part of your child's study, and be able to kind of plan for that yourselves. So it's just another way for us to know what's really going on at school and what kinds of things are happening for our kiddos. The rest of that under SPP and APR and Indicator 13 on that first page is really for the school districts, but I think it's real important that you see the kinds of things that school districts are supposed to kind of be looking at and checking on and making sure that they're doing the right thing. At 16, your student is invited to, anytime that there's a conversation about transition, any kind of meeting that would have a conversation about transition, your student should be there. Some parents don't want their kids to come for the first couple, maybe. Sometimes it's about our kiddos don't like going into those meetings and having people talk about them, and that's understandable. I try to model, when I go along to meetings with families, I try to model appropriate behavior with kids and how you would question a young person sitting there as to, making them a part of the meeting. I work on that a lot because when I go to meetings all over the state, I don't see a lot of it. It's a lot of talking about the kiddo while they're sitting there and not allowing them to have any kind of input or feedback or anything else. Even when we're talking about behavior plans, which I think of all things, our kiddos ought to have input in. I mean, if I'm going to behave, I probably should know what that's going to look like and have a part in telling how that's going to work. So, but it isn't done well yet. We're working on it, but it isn't done well yet. So that's another one of those things when I go out, I just try to make sure that we have an opportunity to talk about that with the school district. The next page, on page 2 of that document, is the importance of the other agencies that are invited. We really would love to see as many agency representatives as possible at the transition meetings because they all have a different viewpoint. So Nebraska VR would have a viewpoint coming from their world and how they do business about your kiddo because they've been meeting with them hopefully monthly to talk about things and to work on skills together and so forth. DD might be there because of some concerns about upcoming life and what life is going to look like after 21 for some of our kiddos. So that would be another agency. Another one that, developmental disabilities, sorry. Another one that I think we kind of forget about is if your kiddo had the opportunity to work for somebody or volunteer somewhere or spend some time doing something that wasn't with mom and dad and siblings, family. And I always put it in the terms of employment, but it could be any of the above. But those people, because they've seen the young person in a whole different light, away from mom and dad, they've been able to determine what the best way is to support the young person to understand a direction, to understand what they're requesting them to do, to be a part of a team that isn't a family team. Those kinds of things. They just have a totally different viewpoint. And I think we forget to invite those kinds of folks to meetings, and I think they're extremely valuable. I think they help us really think out of the box a lot more than we typically do.
That's why they should have paras there.
Yep. That's another one that if it were me, I'd be requesting because I think they have again another viewpoint, and they spend probably more time with our kids than the classroom teacher does. So it kind of depends. The other one would be minister, somebody of faith or otherwise, some kind of social interaction kind of person, because again, it's a different viewpoint. It really does, it does show who our young person is in a whole different light. So don't hesitate to talk with your team about bringing other kinds of folks in, because it does open the door a little bit and helps staff at school get to know our kids in a different way. So.
You mentioned about the Nebraska VR should be meeting with kids monthly.
Yes. Well, that's not a requirement, but oftentimes it's a monthly visit. It kind of depends on, for example, the man, individual man, in the Millard Public Schools does all 3 of their high schools, and he's the only one. But he still meets with the kids monthly. So I think it kind of depends on the number of staff that VR have out there. But I would say to you that if it's a lot less than that, then I'm wondering of what value it might be. So that's a conversation I'd love to have with you. And then I could check in and see what's really kind of going on and make sure that we're getting the best bang for our buck when it comes to, because I do think VR has a tremendous amount to offer our kids if we just have the right strength coming from them.
I didn't know if they did, maybe the monthly started when they were a little bit, closer to graduating.
Sometimes when they're juniors and seniors, there's a little more time given, but it should. Yeah, large group, small group, just kind of depends.
I know for sure you met my daughter once, but she's already a junior, so I didn't know if that's.
It's not enough.
Yeah.
I would ask. I'd probably make a call and just ask what process is used to determine how much time, and then what they're doing with your daughter while they're there. I mean, if they're finding that she's so capable that they don't need to, that's one thing. But if we're working on interview skills and writing a resume and those kinds of things, or other kinds of skills, as far as job skills are concerned, that's a lot more time than once a year would be. Or
yeah, with her plan, how we've done other kids in the past 2 years, it's set up where after they graduate from the district, then they go to Milford for 2 years for the VR there. And so I don't know if that's what factored into why they maybe not meet as much.
I don't know, but I think it'd be a good question to ask. I would, if I were you. And then there's a whole section on page 2 about how do you write measurable post-secondary goals. And again, we're thinking about goals after high school. So after they graduate, what would those goals look like, and what kinds of interests would your kiddo have? So again, the gray part is talking about what schools would look for or look at. And then it gives you the formula for writing a post-secondary goal. And no matter where or who writes it, it's supposed to have after high school or upon graduation, or that kind of wording, because it is about post-secondary. It's not about during school. It's not about, that's the goals and objectives part. So we would write an education or training goal, an employment goal, and an independent living goal like this. And then we would also have goals, and that's in the transition plan. Then we would also, on the goals and objectives pages that you normally have had your goals on, that would also be, we'd have to have at least one goal there that related back to these other 3. Does that make sense? So we want to make sure that not only are we writing these goals for post-secondary, but we're also looking at what kinds of things do we do now in the goals and objectives that get us there. So if you're working with Billy Bob on, he's my favorite kid, Billy Bob on a construction kind of situation, then it may be that a goal in his IEP would be that he would attend or job shadow Joe the construction guy for a period of time to be able to see what construction's really like, and if that really is something he'd like to do, because he's not had that opportunity before. So those relate, and they're always kind of a back and forth to be able to figure out what we're going to do while we're still in high school to make that happen. Make sense? So what they did is they gave us space here so that we could, before we have an IEP meeting on Thursday, we could sit down and actually write out what we think those goals could be, those post-secondary goals, what they could be. Because we know our kiddo, we know what they're interested in, we have a good idea. A lot of our kids are real interested in video gaming and that kind of thing, or listening to music, or video kinds of things. I mean, it just kind of depends. So to actually lay those out for yourself and actually get a kind of a head start so that you've got some idea of what you'd like to talk about going into meetings is a good thing to do. We support families all the time to kind of prep up by doing that. And then it goes on, same kind of thing on page 3 and 4 of this, and I'm going to move on because time flies. But wanted to make sure that you had the Untac document because it is very clear as to how it's supposed to be written, lays it out for you pretty dramatically, and then you could go ahead and write all the goals that you wanted to write. The next document is the multicolored one, of the red, blue, and black, and this is actually built off of the state's SRS system. The student record system is what most school districts use for their IEPs, but it is also everything that is in the law. So I just talk a little bit about what's legally required, and then we get into the measurable post-secondary goals. And again, depending upon the document that your school district uses, the SRS document, and I've complained about it now for 3 years, but the SRS document just has a 1 where it says goals. It just has a 1. It doesn't have a 2 or a 3. It just has a 1. And so it does not support teachers to do the right thing or lead them to developing goals and objectives the way that the law says they're supposed to. So
Is that what this is on?
that is, I think that's the Nebraska. Is that, no, I don't know.
The SRS system?
No, I don't think so. Lincoln has their own. I don't think they use SRS. I think they have their own document. Anyway, so what I've done here is to kind of lay out for you so that you remember that there's supposed to be an education training goal, supposed to be an employment goal, an independent living. There could be others, and schools are I've not run across one that isn't open to, if you want a third or a fourth in, let's say, independent living is not something that your young person needs, but community is. An idea of the kinds of things that could be happening in community to support your young adult. All of this is about a smooth transition to adult life. That's what the law says. So if we're going to make a smooth transition, then we want to put everything down that would be appropriate for our kiddo. And like I said, if independent living isn't, or it could be 4, could be 5. There could be other kinds of areas that you might think that you'd like to see a post-secondary goal. Then there's supposed to be that course of study. We've talked about that probably too much, but it is something that across the state has been lacking in most IEPs that I've seen, and that is supposed to be the full course of study, not just for the year of this document, but the whole time. So that would mean that your kiddo might be that the 20 to 21, that course of study looks very different, but they need to list out what kinds of curriculum, what kind of classwork, what's going to be going on during that time. And then you'll see that underlined it says beginning no later than the first IEP to be in effect when the child turns 16. And we talked about that. If younger, it could be. The IEP team is supposed to make a statement of needed transition services that are required. And that's supposed to be in every one of these sections. So what kinds of needs, and what I typically see schools writing into these areas are things that kids can already do. That isn't what this is supposed to be. It's supposed to be needed transition supports or needed transition services. So under education, under instruction, what kinds of things does your kiddo still need for instruction? Under related service, community experiences, appropriate post-secondary living objectives, daily living skills. In all of those areas, there's supposed to still be needs. What kinds of needs would there be for your kiddo? And what I recommend to families is that they take this single-page document and write it full. Figure out the kinds of things that they think are really needed, and that prepares you then for the IEP and has things in writing, so you don't have to, what was I going to say here? It's all done and ready to go. So hopefully the document will be supportive of you as you go into meetings. Then it talks about functional vocational evaluation. That's the area or place on the document where typically school districts will put that assessment information. But like you see, there's not a lot of room there. So again, I recommend, and I would support you to say to your school staff, would it be possible to just get an added page to our document and something that we'll just continue to build on? That page will go to every single IEP, and we'll just continue to add all the different assessments and all the different outcomes from those assessments, so that we've got kind of a running total of what my kiddo, what we thought in, when he was 16 and now what we think when he's 18. Just gives you a better understanding of how your young person is growing and thinking differently as time goes by. Interagency linkages and responsibilities would be the place where we talk about Nebraska VR and any other, like we talked about earlier, any other folks that we think would be valuable as far as giving information about post-secondary time and life. If you've not done and not knowing anything about your kiddos, but it is valuable. If you have not considered doing a MAP, which is, I'm trying to think what MAP stands for, and it's not coming. But anyway, it's the opportunity to bring people into your house, to sit down, and really the reason that you're doing it is because of your kiddo. And they pretty much lead and talk about what they're thinking in the topic areas. But it's an opportunity for people who love your child to want to give information and feedback and input as to what their thought is about what life should be for your kiddo down the road. It is amazing what those meetings can offer to all of us. And again, it's bringing all those people that have different viewpoints into the same meeting and having them, talk about what they see. And it's everything from day-to-day kind of life to future life and independent living to, what the community could offer to, you name it. We do those things from PTI. If anybody ever wants to have us come and walk through one, it takes about, sometimes it's 2 hours, sometimes it's 3. But it's all put on big paper so that it's something that you can keep. And everybody writes and everybody does. And it's a way of, again, getting that feedback. And it's over a cup of coffee and a donut or whatever.
Is the child included in those?
Young adults, yes.
Or young adults?
Uh-huh. Yep. Typically, young adults will kind of lead that meeting in being the first people to respond to the different sections. And to talk about what they think first, and then everybody else. I had one that had mom and dad and older sibling, had the superintendent of schools, which was kind of like, wow, but they were good friends. Had the minister, she had some vision issues, and so they had the vision teacher there. She had worked as a volunteer over the summer, and they had that employer person there. I was trying to think. The room was packed. But the feedback was, when we were done, the plan for her life was there. It was all laid out, and it was amazing. So just give that a thought as to, pulling people together. You don't need a process to have people who know and love your kiddo that could sit down and really talk through what it is, about your kiddo that makes them a special person in their eyes, and what they see for their future. It's amazing what comes out. So just an idea.
You called it MAP. I think it's also been called person-centered planning.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yep. Same difference. Yep. Thank you.
So you might have heard it called that in some circles too.
So and then there's transition activities, and again, what seems to be put under transition activities are things that Almost all kids get the same transition activities listed for whatever reason. And we want to make sure that this is individualized for your kiddo. So be sure that under transition activities, you're actually looking at the kinds of activities that will make or break your kiddo based on the goals and objectives that you've determined as a team, and then those kinds of needs that they still have. So we want to make sure that those activities make sense for your kiddo, because sometimes it's like, go to a job fair, and every single kid at school has the same go to the job fair goal, and that's, we want to make sure that it's appropriate for your kiddo, and it may very well be, but just be sure, that's all. I just want to make sure. So that's a document that I said to families often to just say, if you want to kind of prep up and be ready for the transition plan of your kiddos. We also say to our families, with permission from the Department of Ed, that we'd start with transition. So you know how you get into the meeting and it's like the front page and then page 2 and then page 3 and then page 4. Well, what we're saying is this is a time in your child's life when the transition plan is the most important part. That there's nothing else in the document that matters more than their transition plan. So we recommend that you start and that you just say to the case manager for your kiddo, what we'd really like to do this time is to start with the transition plan. If we could do that, that'd be great, because we're asking people to be there and we want to make sure that we're conscious of good use of their time. Otherwise what happens, unfortunately, and I've seen it more than I care to count, is that we go through the rest of the document and the transition plan is one of the, like page 7. And what happens is that everybody's looking at their watch because it's been an hour and a half. And so the person from VR who sat there the entire time and been patient and kind and wonderful, DD, whoever else is there, they're all, waiting their turn, but we got 5 minutes left before we have to leave. So want to make sure that the most important part of this is happening first. So if we could do that, that would make sense to me. One of the things that the Nebraska document that I wanted to make sure and share with you is it's mostly about the assessment stuff. And the reason that it is because the assessment is really the foundation for the entire plan. If we don't have those assessments and we don't know what interests and preferences and strengths our young person has, and the team has not figured that out together yet, then it's pretty tough to write a transition plan and talk and think about post-secondary goals if we don't have the answers to those things. So it may be that there are informal and formal assessments. Sometimes teachers will send home a document for you to fill out. Sometimes, but it's important that they really look at what kinds of things based on your child's abilities and what kinds of assessments make sense. The state is doing training across the state. We've got 35 people who have been trained on what's called the T-gap. And don't ask me what that stands for again, because I'm not going to get it. But T-gap is really a process that is utilized to make sure that people are coming to a conclusion that helps us write that plan. So, but they're doing a variety of things, including, like I said earlier, the money that's being given to school districts and to ESUs to be able to purchase assessment documents. So trying really hard to do the right thing and to make sure that our school districts are moving forward. It's been difficult to just, bring it all on board, because there's a lot to it. And like I said, it's been around since 2004, but we're just now getting to the place where people are starting to utilize the assessments and the number of assessments that are required by law. So it's coming, but it's taken a while. The other document that I gave to you is called Topic Brief. And Topic Brief is a variety of goals. So what it does is it lays out goals in specific areas. So post-secondary education goal on the third page is the student will acquire the skills to successfully transition to a 2-year or 4-year college or university. Okay, so that could be the post-secondary goal for education if that fits your kiddo. And then there's objectives, all kinds of objectives that relate back to that. Those objectives would be the goals, that would be the other part of the IEP. So to be able to enroll, to be able to schedule, to be able to practice education strategies, to be able to develop skills to organize their work. You know, those are the kinds of things that you'd want for your goals and objectives pages if this was the kind of post-secondary goal that you were looking for. There are a lot of them, and what I would say to you is that nobody knows your kiddo like you do. So you might want to just go through this and take a look at the kinds of goals that are recommended by this group. They did a really nice job of pulling together ideas on what post-secondary goals could look like that could be massaged to fit your kiddo, and then, you know, the objectives and goals and objectives for the other part of the IEP as well. So there's independent living goals, it's all in there. And I wanted to bring that along just to give you some idea of what those can look like.
I know you talked about this already saying, but it's overwhelming when you look at this, you're like, oh yeah, they need this, they need this, they need this, and this. Just do it for that year.
Right,
I mean,
yep.
You know, we don't want to put much of it.
Thank you.
But yeah.
Yep. I don't want to overdo at the same time. As at an IEP before I came here, the young man has some behavior issues, significant behavior issues at school. He's truant a lot, has a lot going or not. And the one goal on his IEP, it was all about, the whole conversation was about his behavior. And how, you know, what a bad kid he is, even though he has anxiety and ODD, and I mean, he's, you know, the pocket is full of diagnoses. But the goal on his IEP was that he would turn in 80% of his work. So we want to make sure that the goals, just like Donna said, the goals that we're planning are goals that really do fit our kiddo and the issues that our kiddo has, because that's really what we want to work on, are the kinds of things that we still have needs for. Not the kinds of things that, you know, like 80% of the work getting done doesn't really cut it when you're really considering the fact that we're dealing with a behavior kid. Does that make sense?
Present for that?
No, he doesn't go to school. He doesn't like those people. So there. Oh, well, anyway, and it wasn't. I mean, they're doing their darndest, and I don't want to come across because I said to them, I'm not sure where I'd start either. They're giving him another shot, even though he's been extremely abusive and cursing, swearing, and carrying on in the halls, and you name it. And yet, we're going to try another way today. That's the plan. They clean the slate. We're going to start over. This is what we're going to do this time. And I think they're doing their darndest. But again, it's difficult. So when you're going through the PowerPoint that I gave to you, I want to remind you that the process it looks this way. The umbrella is the transition plan. And that transition plan has post-secondary goals hanging from the umbrella. It has goals and objectives hanging from the umbrella. It has assessments hanging from the umbrella. And we need to make sure that all of those things are happening and they all work together, that those pieces all fit together. So when you look at the PowerPoint, you will see that I talk about, I start with education, education training, and I give you a goal that makes sense and that is appropriate, and I tell you why. Then I give you a goal that is not appropriate, and I tell you why. And then we talk about the services that would be a part of that goal, just to give you some idea of how you might think it through as you're working on transition plans for your own kiddo. So hopefully you could take each of those sections and kind of clip the education bunch together, the employment bunch together, the independent living bunch together, so that you could see kind of how those things all fit each other. So the different parts of that. Questions, things that I didn't hit, or things that you're thinking, I wonder why, or wonder what.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question come up a lot about post-secondary education have that come up quite a bit. And should we be talking about life skills more than traditional academics or whatever? What would you say to a parent that asked you that question as an advocate?
Well, what I typically say is I don't know your kiddo, so that that's a start. But I do think that some of our kids, the academic track makes all kinds of sense because they're capable of it. And what we don't want to do is hold them back. On the other hand, some of our kids, the academic track is a waste of time. And if we're really looking at a smooth transition to adult life, what we'd really want to look at are those functional kinds of skills, those things that will make them a qualified, capable employee, no matter what that might be. It could be that our kiddos are not capable of helping out in the library because, for an example, helping out in the library because the inability to move anything with arms and legs. I mean, wheelchair user with not capable of bringing those arms out and actually working. But switches, head switches, work. VR bought the head switches for the wheelchair and bought the conveyor belt that was attached to those. And the young man that I'm talking about is able to be a part of his work is to the books that come back, he's able to scan them and put them in the correct container by his head switches to be able to be employed. So it's that kind of thing where, when I keep talking about thinking out of the box, Lord knows we've got a lot of boxes. But I do think that it's so important that we challenge our kids. At the same time, I think realism in what capabilities there are. That's why I love the idea of bringing in people who see my kiddo differently than I do, because I think that box gets opened when sometimes it just doesn't, because we see the day-to-day. So, to me, it's important that we challenge at the same time. I don't want to waste anybody's time. And our kids only have so much time, and then they're on their own, and we're on our own with them. And so to get that all planned out and ready, it's a lot of work. But at the same time, if we don't do that while we have the opportunity, then we're kind of shortchanging them. I hope that made sense. Probably not.
I would like to say, think of the outcome that you have children at this moment. So wherever they're at in this moment, think of the outcome that they're capable of at this moment. And are they capable of the current academic track? Then fantastic. If they're not capable of it, then we need to look at what are they capable of. And so that's kind of, you kind of said the same thing.
Yeah.
Not overlooking the things that you should be looking at.
So I do think that we have a lot of school districts that are supporting one in particular that will, if the student, no matter what the disability is getting A's, B's, and C's, then that student will graduate with their peers. Period. The end. Signed diploma. Done. And that is not, legally, that's not the way it's supposed to be reviewed or looked at. At the same time, if the IEP has social skills goals and a variety of other kinds of things that are still not completed, then that's the way to maintain. That's why the transition plan and the IEP at this juncture is as important as it is, because it can make the difference between requiring a signed diploma because they are doing everything on the IEP as well, or they're not, and so a signed diploma isn't something that you have to accept. I would also say to you that at the end of your child's career, you'll receive something called a summary of performance. You've never heard of that because nobody talks about it. But I would also recommend to you that you consider that every time that you meet from now on with your child's team, that part of what you talk about is what will be on the summary of performance, because they will, because they can start keeping track of whether they do a portfolio or, again, another notes page or somewhere to keep track of the things that worked, the things that didn't work. We tried XYZ for 2 years. It didn't work. You write that down. It doesn't mean it won't work someday, maybe, but at least there'd be an idea that it didn't work for somebody. All the things that did work and the things that made your students successful, those need to be written down somewhere, because that's a part of that summary performance that you will receive as your child gets that signed diploma.
We get that a lot too. People have assistive technology. We've tried that before, and so they don't try it again because they've tried it in the past, but we don't know how and in what environment they've tried it in. We don't know how often they've tried it. We don't know any of those things because they're not been documented. So you bring up a very good point.
And that summary performance is supposed to be a document that your young person could take to their job place, could take to their additional schooling place, that you could give to their caregiver, if that's their situation, to know what kinds of things worked and what kinds of things didn't work, as other agencies are beginning to work with your student. So that summary performance, unfortunately, as long as I've been around, again, was another 2004 thing. And I did a webinar last spring, and 2 years ago now. And I finished the webinar at 9:45 at night, left the office, went back the next morning at 7, and I had 12 voicemail messages on my phone. 9 of the 12 were teachers who said, "I've never heard about the summary performance before. How long has that been around?" So it is again one of those things where there's just new learning all the time, and we're just really trying to make sure families understand it so that they can lead in some of these things that are again, don't accept a signed diploma unless you're sure we're ready. The signed diploma means everything's done. Your entitlements are over, your rights are done, it's over. And state services will not take place until 21. So if they're even eligible. So making sure that we're taking full advantage of what's available to us and different ways that our kiddo can learn is certainly important. And one of those ways is to not accept a signed diploma unless we're sure that they're capable and there isn't anything more to learn. If there's nothing else, then, but like I said, the IEP and the transition plan at this point in time are the most important documents that you've ever worked with as far as the time that your child's been in school. It's the rubber meeting the road right now.
And unfortunately, unlike some other people, individuals with Down syndrome aren't automatically deemed eligible for services at 21. They're not automatically just based on Down syndrome eligible for state services. So just keep that in mind as well. And we'll find
Everything
out
else they are.
Yeah, we'll find out more about that in the next one. So that's kind of how that flow going in. So they'll tell you about the eligibility requirements.
And Donna, you said Nina was coming in February?
Nina's coming
Okay,
back in February to
just so
talk
you
about
know that
eligibility and
Nina will be here if you want to make an appointment with her or even have a chance to talk to her.
We'll be here in January talking about the DD process, the developmental disability process, the application, the current wait list, the things that are going on with that. And then Nina will be for adult services. And if you qualify and what you have to.
Housing.
That's correct. So
Thank you
that
very
will be
much
good.
for
And then
coming tonight. Appreciate it.
we'll be here talking about Social Security and Medicaid, which really Medicaid is the very first thing you want to take a look at. So.
And like I said, she's a really good listener. So if you and your spouse just want to talk through, if you're not agreeing or just want to talk through that whole guardianship thing, Nina's a great listener and is really very thoughtful about her responses to things. So she's another great person to talk to about, what you're thinking, why you're thinking it, and then she'll give you ins and outs as to, what might work and what might not work. But there's so much to guardianship, so much more than what people think.
They did
So.
a webinar with Seamus Kelly
Uh-huh.
not too long ago that was about that. It was pretty
We do webinars twice a month. It kind of depends on the month as to what she's presenting or what we're presenting on. But so just if you're ever interested in those as well, let me know and I'll get you on that mailing list, and then you'll know in advance what's being shared on, I think it's every other Wednesday. We do one at noon and another one at 8:30 at night, so we can hopefully, it's the same one, we just do it twice, so we can hopefully catch families when they're capable of listening. I'd pick the night one because I could put in my jammies, but you have to be invited to it. So if you're interested in that, just let me know, and I'll make sure that we get you on the mailing list.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, you betcha.
And thank you for your contact information. If you have any questions for her, reach out. Like she said, Nina is your